Hello, friends, and welcome to Doug Reads with Friends. If you're new here, welcome. If you're back after episode 1, welcome back. Really glad you stuck around. Thanks so much for doing so. My name is Doug, and the idea of this podcast is pretty simple. I call up a friend, I ask them to choose a book, they choose that book, we both read that book, and then we get together here to talk about it. The talking about the book is important, of course, but it's really just an excuse for me to get to talk to my friends. I have a lot of really wonderful friends all over the world, and I miss them, and this is a chance for me to get to call them and have a conversation with them. One of those friends from all over the world is my friend Josh Blue. Josh lives in Hong Kong, and he's chosen a terrific book that you can see over my shoulder there, The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. So welcome, and please enjoy this conversation with Josh Blue about the art of gathering. When I moved to Abu Dhabi from Grinnell about 12 years ago, if you had told me that one of the first people I would be thinking about every morning from Grinnell, from my 15 years at Grinnell, was Josh Blue, I would have been surprised. And yet here we are. Josh is absolutely on my mind in the first 10 minutes after I wake up every day. And why is that? Because Josh and I belong to a Facebook group. It is a Facebook group made up of Grinnell alumni who enjoy puzzles, specifically the New York Times daily puzzle. Josh lives in Hong Kong. I live in Abu Dhabi. And that means, thanks to the miracle of time zones, that we are the first two people in this group every day to wake up and do the New York Times puzzles and then share our results with the rest of the group. Josh starts us off every day. It is an unheralded task, a thankless task, but one he fulfills well. And then I wake up a few hours later, I do my puzzles, I say good morning to Josh, and I post my puzzles in the group, and then the day goes on from there. So it's a delightful thing. When I was first thinking about who are the people that I want to have on this podcast, who are the people that I think about as my friends, I thought, it's crazy, but Josh is a friend of mine that I think about every single day, and I don't get to talk with nearly enough. And so I thought, why not? I'm reaching out to Josh. I'm going to have Josh be one of the first friends on my podcast. So Josh, welcome to Doug Reads with Friends.
Thank you, Doug. I'm very excited to be here. And yeah, I think it's hilarious that I'm one of the first people you think of in the morning. But that puzzle group is so strong and it's so supportive.
I mean, I don't know the vast majority of people on that group in terms of ever having met them in real life, but I know them. I know their Wordle habits. I know how they're doing.
And there's one, Peg. Peg is, I think, is on the East Coast in the U.S., and she will often be the next person to post after us. And if I've missed it or if you miss it, then she raises the flag and posts in that group to go, do we know, is he okay? Has anyone heard from him? Which I absolutely love.
It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of friendship. Yeah. So we go back a long way. We go back, you graduated from Grinnell in the early 2000s. Is that correct?
Yeah. 2001.
My first memory of you is working with you really after graduation. So I administered a program that Grinnell ran in collaboration with Nanjing University, where we would select 2 graduates every year to go to Nanjing for a year to teach English. And you were selected in your senior year, and you went off to Nanjing to teach English for a year.
Yeah, I went to Nanjing in August 2001 to work at the Nanda Attached Middle School number 11 with Kasha, and it was an experience. And it's why I'm still in this part of the world. I mean, I was in Nanjing for some major world events. I was there for 9/11, and I remember waking up that morning and having a message from you. And Kasha and I had no idea what had happened, right? Because everything happened overnight for us. And I had a message from you that all you said was, I'm sure you've heard what's happened. We're keeping you in place for now. Be prepared to leave at any time. Now, I haven't heard what's happened. And I was like, what is going on? And I had a message from my then boyfriend and my parents saying pretty much the same thing. And I'm like, I don't know what's happened. Like, I'm in China. And so at that point, you could still access the New York Times in the mainland. And I remember I read the headlines and I was like, oh my, what do I do now? And so I went next door and woke Kasha up. And I said, right, this is everything that's happened. We don't teach till this afternoon, but I had a side gig at a primary school. So I was like, I have to go to work. So maybe you can try and figure out what's going on. But then there were a couple other times too. Like I got really ill during the Chinese New Year. We were traveling in Thailand and Kasha and I had kind of separated and I'd done Lao, and in returning to Thailand, I ended up with some form of typhoid and was in hospital. And I had to contact you, and you got in touch with me, or you got in touch with my parents. And it was one of those weird situations. It was crazy, Doug. Like,
I vaguely remember this.
Disaster was like, it was like, oh, another thing's happened. But in general, the entire program was fantastic.
But apparently it was pretty good if you've stayed for a quarter of a century now in East Asia.
While I was in China and doing all the traveling in Laos and Thailand, despite being hospitalized for 3 days, I was like, oh, I don't think I can go back to the US yet. I want to see more of the world. I was in Hong Kong a couple months before Nanjing, but that was my first time out of the US. So yeah, I was offered a job with a nonprofit. Actually, while I was in Nanjing, it was an education nonprofit here in Hong Kong.
You spent then pretty much the last 20 plus years in Hong Kong. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I had every intention at certain points to kind of move on. The nonprofit job I ended up not really enjoying, and so I gave notice quite early. And I remember calling my mother from the bathroom of the office and being like, I've quit my job. And she was like, you are in a foreign country. What are you going to do? And I very distinctly remember saying, I am a teacher. I will get a job. And so I picked up work at a local kindergarten for a year. And then I got into my first international school. And then I moved into another international school. And I moved into being a teacher to a curriculum coordinator, to being a vice principal, to being a head of primary, to being a principal. And now I have a role where I'm head of education, curriculum, learning, and assessment for the largest English language international school organization in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And I look after 22 schools, kindergartens, primaries, and secondaries, and one special school.
And my knowledge of what you do, a lot of it has to do with the International Baccalaureate or IB program. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the schools I've always worked with are all IB schools. And so I'm a workshop leader, a field representative at regional events. I evaluate schools. I serve on those panels, and I chair multi-program visits. So I get to, besides my regular day-to-day job, when I can, I get flown around Asia Pacific to train teachers, to visit schools and other learning communities. It's the best professional development I can get because I learn so much by being in other schools and hearing the stories and what exists there. Yeah, it's been a really amazing opportunity, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So in January, I'm flying down to Hobart to run a workshop on evidencing learning. In March, they're sending me to Mumbai to the global conference. I'm running a pre-workshop, and this is actually where the book comes into play. The IB has sent me to Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. Like it's incredible.
What do you love about either Hong Kong or living outside of the US? What does that feed for you?
I think the number one thing is a sense of safety and security. That's perhaps a challenging statement too, but Hong Kong is incredibly safe. When I go back with my son, who's 8, I feel really nervous being in the US. I get nervous going to shopping malls. I get nervous being in places where there are a lot of people. In Hong Kong, I don't think we don't have the same kind of worries that schools do. Like we do lockdown drills here in Hong Kong. And the rationale is if something were to happen, but in Hong Kong, there are no guns. And when we do lockdowns, it's often maybe if there's a snake on the campus or there's a monkey that's gotten in or something like that. I think beyond that, I think it's just the opportunity to work with such a diverse group of people every day. Like my best friends, a lot of them are Australian. And so for a long time, I didn't know any Americans. It wasn't like it wasn't common in the education space unless it was like the American school. And so now that I get to be the head of education for the organization, I'm like, oh, all right. Well, I've pioneered that area, but it's that greater sense of community, right? And I think it's appropriate that we're meeting today because next week, next Saturday, we are having our annual Thanksgiving. And we have celebrated Thanksgiving every year. It's my favorite holiday for the fact that it is non-denominational and it doesn't matter where you come from. It is a celebration of togetherness and family. And when you live abroad, you build your own family. I hosted a Thanksgiving once that had over 50 people. This year we have about 40 that are coming. And it's just I can sense myself getting a little emotional thinking about it because it is that sense of community and belonging and being. And every year I make a toast. And in that toast, I say, if you're here this year, you're always invited. So wherever you are in the world, you know you always have a place at our table. And I think that's the essence of what it means to be international and to be abroad, and that the differences aren't so defined. It's more the shared sense of purpose and community and why we're here together that brings us together.
Do you ever see yourself going back to the US?
I don't, in the near future, no. If there comes a point in my son's schooling where I think it will be best for him if we were to move to the US, if we would need to get residency so he can go to the college or university he wants to go to. But no. And I think the other thing too is like being international, we can still travel quite easily, right? And so I generally am in the States twice a year. But yeah, no, I don't see us moving. My partner is an in-flight service manager, so like the top kind of flight attendant for the airline he works for. And his job is very much tied to Hong Kong. He is not from Hong Kong. He is Japanese. But yeah, I don't see myself moving back.
Let's talk about, since this is a reading-focused podcast, let's talk a little bit about you as a reader. Is reading a big part of your life?
Yeah, it always has been. I grew up in a house of readers. Like we would go to the library every week. And not only would I take out a stack of books this high, but my parents would take out stacks of books this high. And my tutorial at Grinnell, so for those who are not Grinnellians, at Grinnell we have what are called tutorials, and it's like your freshman intro kind of class, and you've got a small group of about 12 to 15 students maybe, and they're on a vast variety of topics. And the one that I chose, and it was with Sigmund Barber, was literature and the struggle for identity. And I thought, well, this will certainly help me find myself in my first couple weeks at Grinnell. Love reading. I like reading fiction and nonfiction. I like a good mystery. I do like a bit of fluff, but I also like really juicy and meaty books as well. And here in Hong Kong, I'm actually part of a book club, and it took a while to be accepted into the book club. The book club in its original state has been running since, I don't know, the mid 90s maybe. And they've had a very kind of structured format in which there are always 3 men and 3 women. And if you leave the book club, you have to find your own replacement. And then I got the call. And I think I started in the book club shortly after Isaac was born, maybe. And the way it works for our book club is that we just rotate the people who are choosing. So your time usually will come up twice a year, ahead of time. We read anything and everything. Sometimes works well and sometimes fails miserably. It's been a really long time since we've had anything really decent. And my pick is coming up, and I'm playing around with a few ideas, but it needs to be an easy read is what I've decided, because the last couple of reads have been just cumbersome.
What do you love about the book club?
It's all about the people. It's not really even about the book. But the people that I'm with, there are a few people who I wouldn't have met regularly within kind of my circle, but they're people who I only see at book club. And I don't socialize with them, but otherwise, when I see them face to face, that's the time that I do that. But I would do anything for those people in my book club. If there was an emergency, I'd be there. Or if they called out and needed help with something, I'd be there. And it's that sense of community and belonging again, right? Like, I think when you are abroad, we crave that. We push ourselves to be parts of communities, to have that sense of belonging. And I think that's what I get out of the book club. And I've read some really great books too, which is great, but it's not everything.
Can you talk to me a little bit about language? Are you able to get around in English all the time? Is your book club in English, or do you speak Cantonese? What are you doing with your son with a bilingual household?
You've like hit upon my like passion area here, Doug. So a little bit of background. I do a lot of the independent research because I'm that nerdy that I've done is around the concept of translanguaging, which is this concept that we, regardless of if you consider yourself a monolingual speaker or a multilingual speaker, have a multitude of different languages. And that those languages could just be kind of like family languages or terms that you use to reference things, not like a formalized structured language. Like the idea that we each have what's called an idiolect, which is kind of like our language fingerprint. So we made a choice when Isaac was born, because of probably all the research I've done, that we would be fully bilingual. And so my partner Taka has only spoken to Isaac in Japanese since he was born. And if he tries to speak to Taka or his papa in English, Taka will respond, "I don't understand," in Japanese. But we can sit at the dinner table and Isaac and I will go back and forth in English. Taka and Isaac will go in Japanese, and Taka and I will go in English. So going back to your kind of question around Hong Kongan language, I am functional in both Mandarin and Cantonese. The Mandarin, I did pick up some while I was in Nanjing. One of the things that they did when we were there was each of us, Kasha and myself, each got one of the teachers at the school assigned to us to be our language teacher. Now, the woman I was assigned was lovely. However, I learned things like my car is broken and I need this tire fixed, or my favorite, which I'm going to try in my bastardized kind of Mandarin, which is "bu wo shi dan chen, me you qi guan yan wo qing ke," which is pretty much, no, I will pay. I don't have a bossy wife.
When you have neither a car nor a wife,
Nor a wife. Because in 2001, we did not have translation apps. No one was speaking English. There was no way to communicate. Like I had to build up confidence to go into a shop or to ask how much something was. So my Cantonese and Mandarin are actually fairly functional. Some Japanese because of, my family, but I also worked at the Japanese school for a number of years.
Is it difficult to find English language books in Hong Kong?
No, we've got one bookstore and there are multiple branches. They're called Bookazine. In general, though, Amazon will deliver for free if you've got an order of $49.99 or whatever. For a long time in book club, I would get physical books, but I'm running out of room. Because I also have a really big passion for children's literature and picture books, and I present on that as well, and I just don't have any space. My commute's now a bit longer, so I've actually started listening to books, which is a little bit hard because I do find it hard to focus. I do like a physical book.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book that you chose. What did we read together, and why did you choose this?
We read The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, and we chose this book for two reasons. One, when you contacted me, I was in the middle of writing my proposal for the IB conference in Mumbai. And Priya Parker's work was something that was going to be a big piece of that workshop. And I thought, it'd be really good to dive back into this book. And the other reason was the whole premise you gave me around this podcast. And I was like, well, this is a gathering. There's two of us, but this is still very much a gathering. And actually, the way that you framed the podcast and kind of gave me the I'm going to use rules in quotes, and those guidelines really sits well with kind of her thesis in the book.
If someone has never heard of this book, as I had never heard of it before you chose it, how would you describe this book? What would be your kind of back cover blurb for this book?
Tired of pointless meetings? Bored at a dinner party? Wondering why you're even there? Look no further? Explore the idea of intentionality behind why people gather together and reinvigorate your next professional, social, or personal occasion. It's a book about intentionality and belonging at its very, very core. As much as some of the tips and the stories that she has, it is about really knowing the why behind whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that's at the crux of it, because we've all said in meetings before, whether it's a meeting for work or for a social group, and I would say 97% of the time you leave that meeting and think, oh, this could have been an email.
Could have been an email.
Or how did I grow from that experience? And I think her point is that if we're getting together, we should be growing together. We should be learning from each other in some facet, or whatever little nugget you want to take away from there. But like, that should be at its core. And in order for that to happen, you have to plan for that to happen. You can't magically expect things to go together. It's kind of, going back to our Thanksgiving for next Saturday, like, the intentionality is very clear. And I make that very clear when I send out the invite. We are coming together to be together because you are part of our family. And we are going to eat good food. We're going to drink good wine, and we're going to have fun. And that's it. There's no other expectation. It doesn't matter what dish you bring. It doesn't have to be traditionally Thanksgiving dish. Bring something from your own culture or background or your favorite food. I don't really care. I want you there, because when we are all together, we are stronger, and it just grounds us, and it reminds us that, yep, we may be part of this wider world, but we're also part of this special family. Yeah.
And that cannot be an email.
That is not an email.
It's got to be in person.
That is not an email.
There's a reason to meet for that. Is there anything in this book that's going to impact how you do that Thanksgiving gathering this year?
It's funny. I did think about that. I was like, am I going to change anything? Like, one of the things that Priya Parker talks about is Bob, right? She references Bob. And the idea behind Bob is that everyone has a Bob that they invite to a gathering because, well, he's not going to rock the boat, but he's also really not going to add anything. But we invite Bob because we feel bad if Bob isn't invited. And she's like, stop inviting Bob. Like, he doesn't need to be there for this event. Find an event that Bob belongs at and invite Bob. And so I kind of did think, I'm like, are there Bobs in this group? But no. And I think that's the beauty of this kind of event, because I'm continually also inviting new people kind of into the fold, because Hong Kong's transient too. The group has remained a large group, and people have left, but many more people have come. It's not this finite exercise. I thought about the rules kind of bit, and I am fairly clear, like, here's a timeline. You can arrive after this point, and we're aiming to eat at this time. And then when we finish, we have to use a function room here where I live because we can't fit 40 people here, but we'll still end up with about 20 people up here in our flat after we leave that room, because we continue on. So those kind of parameters I've made very clear, but I think I always have. So I don't think that was anything new for me.
What is the role of culture in all of this? Because she puts the needs of the gathering above the needs of the individuals. Do you think they're universal, or do you think she misses something with culture here?
I don't think she misses it. I think there are cultural aspects, though, that need to be considered alongside perhaps her ideas and her rules around gathering, and kind of how she frames that. I don't think we cannot separate our culture and what we bring to the table. I was at this event in Shanghai this weekend, and the company is based in India. And we decided, the three of us from my organization, on the Friday night, I was going to see my best friend from high school because he happens to be in Shanghai, and they were going to go off to have dinner. And on the Saturday morning, we bumped into the people who are running the event, and they said, oh, you weren't at the mixer last night. And I said, my best friend is here, and I wanted to go and see him. And she said to me, well, you could have brought him. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, no, I don't think I could have. And then I was talking with my colleague who she grew up in the Philippines, and she goes, oh, no, that's cultural. Of course you would invite him. That's completely, because I was like, it was kind of awkward. Like, he wasn't part of the conference. He wasn't here. He doesn't know I don't know any of these people, which is one of the reasons we didn't go to the mixer. So when she said that to me, I was like, is that cultural? And I thought, yeah, I guess it actually is. Like, I think with my North American kind of lens on, I would go, right, I'm having this dinner party, and then I find out that someone else wants to come. I may or may not include them, but from a kind of my international lens, I would probably be like, yeah, please come and join us. It doesn't matter. We'll just add another place and it will work and we'll make it fine. I think my Midwestern mindset would be like, yeah, we'll just add another place and you can come and it will be fine. We might talk about it later behind their backs, but we'll include them to begin with. So yeah, there's a cultural piece there for sure, but that wasn't the lens she was coming from.
How does do you take the principles from this book and apply them in your work life and the conferences you go to? It strikes me that in both your work, day-to-day work, as well as the broader work that you do across the region, you are in charge of a lot of gatherings. How will this book impact how you run those?
When I travel around Asia Pacific and I'm in Korea or Japan or Australia, I have to frame a workshop differently for each of those contexts. I'm given guidelines, but I have to establish the rules of that engagement at a very different level. When I go and run training in India, I have to up my game. I have to know the source material inside and out. I have to be able to quote references and know the page numbers because the people I'm working with will be able to quote from the text and reference page numbers. When I go to Australia, I have to build my social capital really quickly and identify my sense of humor before I can get anywhere with pushing thinking forward within an educational context. I don't think that's something that she touched upon in the book. I think that'd be something fascinating to kind of research and write a book about. The other bit I definitely have started to do is that intentionality piece and that why. And I'm constantly driving the why in all the work that I do. And it goes back. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about he wrote The Power of Why and talks about the golden circle and really knowing your why in order to define your how and your what. And when I talk to leaders and working on kind of developing who they are as a leader, we go back to the why. Why is it you do what you do? So I had to recently bring a group of educators from across the 22 schools together to start to begin to work on some reporting guidelines. Now, this is a very contentious piece of work because all 22 schools, although it's one foundation, they are all 22 autonomous communities. And so where do we even begin? And I knew full well that coming into that space that there would be tension. So in the email that I wrote, I said, this is the framing of the day. This is where we're going to start. We're going to start by using some visible thinking routines and thinking about perspective. Then we're going to have a go at writing some things down and trying to find parity. And then we're going to do some blue sky thinking. And so I think the clarity in the why and the how, and it was very structured. Like by the fourth visible thinking routine, they were like, come on, Josh. Like, we know you like these routines. And I said, but then I flipped it on them. I said, can you see though the intentionality behind why we are unpacking it through each of these tools? And they said yes. And we finished that day. And remember, I said it was on reporting guidelines, which is not the most riveting piece of work to do. But everyone, I received emails saying that was a really well-run day. I felt really positive about the work that we did, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. That's the feedback that we want when we gather people. We want them to come away wondering and wanting to be part of what is coming next.
What you're saying there, your example is making me think of a phrase that she uses and advocates for of generous authority. That when you are hosting, when you are in charge of a meeting, that your audience, the people you are meeting with, the people you are gathering with, want to be led, and that you have to assert that authority, but you have to do it in a generous way. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to transparency. I had to do some logistics at a conference recently, and I had to get up in front of this massive ballroom of 900 people. And I perform and act and I am usually comfortable in these settings, but I also, in those settings, I'm someone else, but I had to stand up there as me. And I have to name it to begin with. And I go, I need to tell you, I'm a bit nervous standing up here, but that will pass in a minute and then I will sound more confident. Whereas most people in those settings will just kind of fight and struggle with the nerves. But the moment that you are transparent in those settings, people relate to you as a human being. And I think that's ultimately where it comes from. And with that term generous authority, the authority piece is what sticks with people. But if you can be human in your execution of that, people will make that connection. When I run workshops, I know what I'm talking about. Like, I have the background. I wouldn't volunteer to do it if I didn't. But I'm usually very nervous to start. And I'll say, I am really nervous. And it's going to take me a little bit to get into flow. But once I'm in flow, we'll be fine. But I want you to be aware of that, because you might see my hand shaking, or you might see me stumble on my words. And people, they'll start to look around and they'll be like, he's really saying that? Like right here? Or on the flip side, when I wrap up work with the learning community, particularly my IB work, and I've traveled and I've spent 2 days with the community, I get emotional when I say thank you. And so I know that I'm going to tear up, and I will say, I have a few things that I'd like to say, and I might cry. And that's okay, because it means that the work we've done here has really impacted me and you've connected with me. And I think that's also really powerful. So many people in leadership positions don't step into that space, because the image that we see is, oh, you have to be authoritarian, and you have to be strong, and you're a man and you can't show any of those emotions. So what are you thinking? And you're a woman and you can't show those emotions because it shows you're weak. And that's ridiculous. So I definitely believe in that generous authority. And I think it's something that I do well.
It ends with a tear. It ends with a hug, as with the previous story. Feels like the end of a lot of Josh Blue stories.
Yeah, they do.
And that's great. That's beautiful. That's a really lovely thing. That's a very genuine, honest way of being. Were there parts of this book that didn't resonate with you? Were there parts that you read that you're like, eh?
I question putting people on the spot. So in a lot of the kind of dinner kind of gatherings she mentioned, there was the whole kind of giving a toast or telling a story to kind of fit in with the theme. And I'm all for that. I think that's a really great thing to do. And I can understand why she doesn't want to preempt that, because then you get something that's inauthentic. And you want the authenticity of that moment to really leverage it. And you actually want the stories that other people tell to influence what people are going to choose to tell. So I can see the intentionality there. But for a lot of people, that's not a comfortable space for them to be in. And so when we consider like a universal design for learning, or, how are we accommodating everyone in this space? I wonder in those spaces, I mean, it seemed like everyone was comfortable speaking in English, which is fine. In many settings, people aren't. And so how do you then leverage that and allow them to be in that space and to share at the same level?
What I was thinking about when I read that section was a phrase that the Posse Foundation uses a lot. And the Posse Foundation is a foundation that's very, very near and dear to my heart, has had a very large impact on me and on my life. And they lead these Posse Plus retreats with Posse scholars at colleges and universities all over the country. And one of the ideas that they introduced there, because these are very emotional gatherings, these are very personal gatherings. They tend to be large. They can be 100 people, but they're asking people to really invest, to tell their stories, to listen to one another, to relate to one another. And so they ask deeply personal questions, and they ask people to reveal deeply personal things. But the phrase that they use there is challenge by choice. And they'll come out and kind of say, okay, imagine a circle around you, and that circle is what you're comfortable with. And what we're asking you to do is step outside of that circle as much as you are comfortable doing. That taking a big jump outside of that circle can make you massively uncomfortable, and nobody wants you to be massively uncomfortable. And so that's where I think that what she argues is that really to have an effective gathering, that you have to ask people to take risks, that you have to push boundaries, that you have to go outside of the normal, that you have to run towards danger, essentially. That can lead to very, very meaningful outcomes. That can lead to very, very personal conversations. But it can also freak people out, and not everybody's going to be comfortable with that, especially as you said, and I hadn't thought of that. It's a great point. If it's not your language, right? There's a kind of an understanding of language throughout this that she kind of assumes, but that may not be the case.
Well, and there's the cultural lens as well. Like, I cannot, there are many pieces where I thought this will not work in a Japanese language setting.
Can you give a couple of examples of that?
Well, I think it's just that unveiling of kind of self and the personal level. I just don't think that candidness exists. Like
Mm.
Japanese culture, and look, I recognize that I'm not Japanese, but I have lived with my partner who is Japanese for almost 15 years now. And there is a certain level of protocol that has to happen. And there is never a direct conversation in Japanese. It always kind of has to go around in the most obscure kind of path possible in order
Obscure
to
to you and
end up.
me.
Yes, yes, to get to kind of the end result. And so I cannot see in a traditional Japanese setting those conversations happening.
How do you handle that when you're running a workshop or a conference? How do you exert generous authority in a multicultural context where other people are known or perceived to have authority over you, and that deference to authority is so important?
I think I might be unique in this sense, in that the roles that I do, when I go into a school and I'm a workshop leader, I am coming in as the authority of the IB. And so I am coming in that role. So there might be a principal within that space, and I might only be a curriculum coordinator at a school, for example, but I am seen as the expert within what it is that I am doing. So that hierarchy doesn't exist. I guess sometimes it does within the work that I do now, but so I'm the head of education, which means I'm working with teachers, I'm working with senior leaders, I'm working with principals. But because I've been a principal and I've been a teacher and I've been a curriculum coordinator, I can enter most spaces within an educational context and have a flat level of hierarchy that exists because we have shared experience and we start with that. And maybe that's where it needs to come from with that generous authority, is by declaring and naming, here's our shared context. And this is the context that we are working within while we are at this particular gathering. Setting the boundaries, setting that intentionality and being like, right, it doesn't matter what your named title is. Everyone has a place to contribute here, and making sure that everyone really fully understands that.
We need to start to wrap up. Any other points you wanted to make about this book, or big thoughts that you had that you were like, gosh, I've got to make sure I talk about this?
Well, I'm going to pull up one of the quotes that I took note of, but there's this one, which actually I think it fits nicely at the end of the podcast even, which is, find small ways to metaphorically wrap your gathering in a bow and thereby distinguish it. Like a teacher who ends class with a story rather than an assignment, walking your guests to the door to say goodbye, or just a moment or tight squeeze to acknowledge what has happened. And I think that's really important. When I send emails, I usually end with a line of appreciation. And when I conclude a meeting or a workshop, I also end with that level of appreciation. So within this space, Doug, I would like to show my appreciation to you, because when I got your email, I was really touched. I mean, we have only seen each other a handful of times since we left Grinnell, but I really value that time. Like when I realized we were going to be in New Orleans together and we could catch up for a drink, I was like, how cool is that? And then I was like, is this going to be awkward? We're like Wordle buddies, but like we're Grinnellians too. So that should be fine. So thank you for including me within this wonderful podcast idea. I think it's super original. I think it's a really great idea. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the other books that you read with other people. I appreciate the fact that you reached out. I appreciate the time and effort that you put into really kind of crafting this space and the intentionality that you've put into it. So thanks.
Oh, thank you, Josh. I really appreciate that. And that's very generous of you. And I'm very, very grateful for that. If we're going to put a bow on this, as she said in that quote, I'm developing, I think, a tradition here. This is the second podcast, so that's exactly how long of a tradition it is, of imagining with my guests, based on what we have read together, when and where we might next meet. It's got to be something highly intentional, but based on this book, what do you think the intentionality of our next gathering might be?
I think it will be It will be a catch up because we've randomly ended up in the same place in the world together. Because that's how you and I roll. We're both international travelers, and we're always going from post to pillar. And I think what we would talk about is this podcast. I think we'll talk about how it's going and what your next steps are. And I might try and finagle my way back on at some point if this is going to be like a regular thing, because I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I mean,
Good.
I enjoy talking, as you've noticed, but the whole concept, I think, is really cool.
That's great. My addition will be that I want Kasha to be there. So, almost 25
that
years
would be
ago.
so cool. I would love that. Could we do a podcast with the three of us? That would be super fun.
So Kasha was your compatriot in Nanjing 20 plus years ago for that year. I have stayed in less close contact with her than I have with you. I think we're maybe Facebook friends or LinkedIn connections. I certainly associate that experience for you with her. And my other addition would then just be, having talked with you about this and heard how generous you are with your emotions and your spirit, that the gathering will end with a hug and maybe a tear.
Absolutely.
Because that is how Josh Blue ends his interaction. So, Josh, thank you so much for this. This has been an absolute delight. I appreciate your choice of book, because I would not have read this otherwise. And I really am grateful for you for being my friend. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
And that's it for episode 2 of Doug Reads with Friends. Thank you once again to Josh Blue for choosing a terrific book, The Art of Gathering, and for being my friend, coming on the podcast, trusting me in this process, and having a terrific conversation. One of the things I have really enjoyed in this podcast so far, even in just these first 2 episodes, is the diversity of books that my friends are choosing, whether it is a lovely novel, as in the first podcast, the second episode, a nonfiction book, and coming up for episode 3, which will be released on the first Friday in February, we have a romance novel, Lost in Oaxaca, by Jessica Winters Bareilles. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. This was chosen by one of my favorite people, one of everybody who knows her, one of their favorite people, Alicia Hayes, who does work very similar to what I do at the University of California at Berkeley. We will be back in early February to talk with Alicia about Lost in Oaxaca. Until then, thanks very much for listening. Please send any comments to dougreadswithfriends@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast so far and any suggestions you might have for the future. Music for Doug Reads with Friends is made by my friend, Erin Caffel. Thank you, Erin. Please follow Erin on Spotify. She is an absolutely spectacularly talented musician. Friends, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being my friend. Be well and take care. Thanks.